How old were you when the U.S. entered the war?
I was 16.
And I was just 16. I went to Granite High and he went to Davis High. We were in high school and we heard about the war the day before on Sunday. It's when they bombed Pearl Harbor anyway. Where we were mostly concerned with the war in the Pacific and not the Atlantic.
What was your immediate thoughts when you heard about the war?
I didn't know what war was. I had no idea hardly. And I thought, why would they do that to America? We aren't mad at them. I don't know what David thought.
What? Well, then we were astounded. You know, and Davis High was like Granite. It had Japanese, American-born Japanese students. And immediately there was they weren't this way, they were this way. But mostly it was because they looked like Japanese and people thought they were enemies. But they weren't really.
That's interesting. Okay, what did you do for fun during the war?
We worked. I don't remember having much fun during the war.
We didn't have
I went in the
dances
war.
much in the high schools or anything like that. We just had parties at home if we had them, but we didn't have many big parties at all.
I wore overalls
Cool.
and pants and a shirt.
And girls still wore dresses to high school. We didn't wear pants to school at all.
That's cool.
And so we usually were dressed up a lot more than girls are dressed up now.
Cool. Did you know anyone serving in the war?
Well, it wasn't long till boys were starting to be drafted right in my ward in East Millkirk. And so it started, and I had cousins that went, because I had a lot of boy cousins, and they were drafted.
I had a brother that was going to Utah State, and he took ROTC. But he went first in 1941 because he's 8 years older than I am. And he went to Arkansas. And then I had a sister that was 2 years older than I am, that was a Navy nurse in the Naval. Gip was in the Air Force, and then my kid brother came in after I did, and he was in the Air Force, and I was in the Army.
Cool.
Lots of young people went in the service because I didn't know anybody in high school that wasn't willing to serve.
Cool. How did you learn about what was going on in the war?
Radio, newspaper.
It hit the news all the time.
Yeah, the newspapers were full of it.
But we didn't have TV.
Cool. How did the war affect your family life at home?
Well, I'm one of 16 kids. 4 of us served in the service. And everybody was concerned about the 4 that were in the service.
I just had boys. I just had sisters. I didn't have any brothers, so none of mine went. But I was starting in nurses training, and I knew that I would have to go after I graduated if the war was still going, because David had a sister who was a nurse, and she had to go into the Navy.
Did you use ration cards or create a victory garden or anything like that?
I can't remember that one. Say that one.
Ration cards.
Did you use ration cards or have a victory garden
Well,
or anything?
When I was in training, after the first year, we lived at the hospital and we just ate at the hospital, so it didn't bother me. But I knew my folks at home had ration cards for sugar and different things. And they just used that. When they ran out, they went without.
In our family, we always raised a garden. We had cows and horses and pigs and chickens. We raised what we ate, and we always had a garden, and the rationing didn't affect us. It affected people who didn't have gardens, and sometimes they they built what they called a victory garden. But we didn't have a victory garden. Ours was just, that's what we
It was
did every
one
day.
big victory garden.
Yeah, I guess it was a big victory garden.
How did you feel about the Germans and the Japanese at that time?
Well, I'd always had, at Granite High, we always had Japanese students that lived in Granger, and they had big farms there, and they were just like everybody else, except we knew they were, I was Swedish, and I knew that they were a little different, but it didn't make any difference to me. But after the war was declared, it became a little suspicious and wondered why, what's gonna happen here. And they really wondered. David said one Japanese boy, or he put his hand on the shoulder of a Japanese friend, and the Japanese boy was used to being ridiculed, and so he turned around to hit him.
He put me on the floor in half a second.
So
I
see,
said, Shig, I'm your friend. If you want to know how I felt,
I gotta go turn that stuff.
I didn't know where I was going, but I trained in California, and you're 17 weeks basic training, and then you're shipped out. And I was shipped out to Oro Bay, New Guinea, and I fought through New Guinea and the Philippines, and ended up in Japan in the occupation forces.
How did the war affect your education and work opportunities?
Well, I just didn't get any more education after I was drafted, because I was 18 when I went in the service out of high school, and I was 21 when I came home.
Go ahead.
How did the war affect your education and work opportunities?
Well, I was gonna be a school teacher because I loved history like you do. And I was starting at the university and that. And a friend of mine said, well, why don't you take the nursing exam, because I have to take it and you can go with me and then I won't be alone. So I went and took that. I passed it, she didn't. And she was one that wanted to be the nurse. But I thought, when the war started, I thought, well, if we do have war and it lasts a long time, they'll need nurses. So then I started at the university, switched over to nursing and more science.
Do you remember hearing about the war ending? What were your thoughts then?
Well, now I'll tell you what we were in the Philippines. We had captured the Philippines. Excuse me. We had captured the Philippines, and we knew we were training to hit Japan. And our instructors told us that we would have to kill everything if we hit Japan, because they would be defending their country.
Now, isn't that
And
scary?
everybody would have a booby trap or something to kill you. But when the bomb was dropped, when the atomic bomb was dropped, we were the biggest cheerers you ever heard. I mean, we knew the war was going to end. We knew it, because
It had caused so much damage.
the first bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. The second was dropped on Nagasaki. Hiroshima is a flat country type. From here to Salt Lake City, and from here to nearly to Ogden, one bomb, 500 feet in the air, went off, and it wiped out everything in a 14-mile radius. You can't believe that, but it's true. I saw Hiroshima, and it had nothing. There was a few metal structures that were still, the metal part was still standing, but it wiped out everything. And then Nagasaki, which I saw it hit up in the canyon up above Nagasaki, and it wiped out the Michikahara Steel Works and a big glass factory and a Catholic church, and there was a mountain of glass. It melted everything that was around those glass bottles that were stored. and the glass all melted into a kind of a hill. And it didn't hurt Nagasaki City as much as it did in Hiroshima because there were mountains in between. But I want to tell you that it was an impressive sight when I saw Hiroshima. But Hiroshima is a beautiful city now. Anything else you want to know about World War II?
I think that's it.
No, I'm going to tell you something else.
Awesome.
When we were fighting, go ahead, sit down if you want. When we were fighting, and they were firing at us, we were firing at them, I got to thinking about the guy over there that was shooting at me. And I didn't know him from Adam's off ox. I didn't know who he was. I didn't know anything about him. And I got to thinking, I don't really hate him because I don't know him. It's hard to hate people you don't know. And he was out there and he was fighting us because he was told to be. I was over here and I was fighting them because I was told to fight them. But really, you don't hate the guy, you know. And after the war, 4 years after the war, I went back to Japan on a mission. And one of our counselors in the mission presidency had been a prisoner of war in Japan for 3.5 years. A prisoner of war. He went through the Bataan Death March. And he said to us, he called us together in Tokyo in the mission home, the ones that were there. You must know that a lot of the missionaries that were in Japan at that time were ex-Army, Navy, Marine Corps, or Air Force.
GIs.
Somebody that had served there, but now they went back on a mission. And we went for 3 years because the Korean War was on. And we were older. And when President Hansen stood up, called us in, he stood up and he said, "Elders, sisters," he says, "I love these people. I love them." And he'd been a prisoner of war. And he said, "And they are God's children and they have a right to hear the truth." I want you to know that it changed my life, changed my attitude. It changed everything I was there for. I was there to teach the gospel. I was not there for recriminations. And all of those missionaries that were with me that had been in the service and had fought against the Japanese or the Germans repented real fast and decided that the reason they were there was not for recriminations. They were there to teach the truth. And the Japanese, like we, are all of God's children too.
Cool.
And they have a right to hear the truth.
Cool. Well, thank you for your time.
Thank you. And those people over there, they're tribes.
Uh-huh.
You never lick a tribe. You can knock them down, but you never lick them.
Tell them how the Lord looked out for you.
Okay, I was shot at, never hit. I shot and never shot anybody.
Oh, really? Wow.
And I think the Lord had his hand in mine all the way through the war. I really do. I think the Lord looks out for those who belong to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or anybody who believes in God.
How old were you when you joined the military?
I was 18.
He didn't join, he was drafted.
I was drafted. I was there because I was told to be there.
Uh-huh.
But I honestly, the people who were in Davis High with me, when we became seniors, most of them were anxious to get into it.
Uh-huh.
And especially after Pearl Harbor was attacked. And I'll tell you something else. Because we're a free country and we understand freedom better than any other country in the world, we had more incentive for fighting than anybody else. You think about it. When I came back from the war, I kissed the ground in San Francisco. I was so grateful to be home. But the Japanese were glad to be home. The French were glad to be home. The Germans were glad to be home. Nobody likes war except the warmongers. The ones who hated us the most were the kamikazes. The kamikazes were suicide pilots, and they'd dive their plane right into a ship, destroy the ship, or wherever they were headed. But the ordinary person never wants the war to fight. I don't think.
Well,
Yeah.
they don't think. I'm going to tell you about my father was in the First World War, and one time I said to him, "Father, how many Germans did you kill?" And he said, "I'm not going to answer that, and don't ever ask me that question again."
It isn't something you
It
want to
wasn't.
remember.
It was a sad thing for him, so I suppose he killed some, and he was not in any way happy about that.
My dad was in the Vietnam War, and he told me a story once about he had like a general or someone who was over him say, "You're doing a really great job right now," and my dad said something like, "I'm not sure I'm happy about that," because it meant he was killing a lot of people.
Well, I'll tell you about a very heroic thing I saw. We were on a hill. There were two hills here and across the way. There was a road came up here, and it ended in a T. They call it the big T area because the road came up here and one went through here, and so it was the end of that T. The Japanese were over here and in caves, and it was a pretty high hill, you know, and the caves were up there. And we were on this side. We were going to take them. They called in the Air Force, and this is the bravest thing I ever saw in my life. To me, it was. Those planes, the P-38s, are a twin nacelle plane, and they flew into those cliffs with napalm bombs. Napalm is something that
It's a
burns
terrible
very,
thing.
very hot.
It burns yours.
And they didn't hit actually in a lot of the caves. They didn't hit in them. But that napalm sucked all the oxygen out of the caves, and the people in the caves died because they had nothing to breathe. But they walked those bombs right up those cliffs. They'd fly those planes in and zoop like that, and let the bomb release the bomb, and it just wiped out those caves as far as having people in them. But it was a brave thing to do, to fly a plane towards a cliff
Yeah.
and hope you survive. But I didn't see one plane crash. It was a brave, brave thing to do. But we never had any trouble with those cliffs after that.
But war's terrible. Everybody felt like it was terrible.
Well, war is terrible. We were walking once across a field, or not a field, a plain area, towards some mountains that we were going to take, and I got to thinking, sure be nice to turn and run. You know what? You'd have to be a darn brave coward to turn and be the first one to run if all their friends are going, or all their co-army people are going ahead. And when we got over here a ways, there were 20 bodies laid out that had been killed, and they laid them out so that they could pick them up. But that's what war is.
It's terrible.
And when you fight in New Guinea, the jungle is so thick, 5 feet away from me, you can't see anybody. And I know the outfits that were in so close and somebody started firing, so they'd fire back. With having so many trees between you, very seldom anybody got hit. But they were our own outfits.
Oh, because it was too hard to tell who was who?
Well, they didn't know. You couldn't see. My job was intelligence and reconnaissance. I scored really high in my aptitude test when I took my aptitude test, and they put me in the intelligence and reconnaissance instead of a line company, which is the rifle company. So I wasn't actually in the line company, but we fought. We were up there with them because our job was to set up observation posts or things like that where they could watch the enemy and plan what they were going to do. Then we built, you take this table and magnify it 4 times, and we had sandboxes like that, and they'd take 3D air pictures showing the depth of the trees, the sand, the creeks, the mountains, everything, and we'd make a copy of that in sand, add trees, and the company commanders would come up and they'd hold sessions where they studied that terrain so they knew what they were going into. And that was our job, was to build these great big sand maps. And they took pictures. They'd fly planes in where they were going to go and take pictures, and then come back and develop them, and then give them to us, and we'd copy them. And copy it with sand and trees and valleys and mountains, and so that they knew what they were going into. Because there was one hill called 355, which we were supposed to take, and we couldn't get it from one side, so we made a 20-hour march, circled it, went to the village of Palak, and hit it from the other side, and they did take it, but the Japanese had it full of caves and trenches and that. But you know, war it isn't an overnight thing. It takes a long time to fight and to win, and you get replacements, and you're replaced. I will win it as a replacement.
Do you think that's why, in the end, they used the atomic bomb, because it was going to take forever
the atomic bomb, I hope they never use one again, and it's a terrible, terrible thing. But that one bomb, 500 pounds, dropped out of the sky, and 500 feet above the ground it went off. Okay, when a bomb goes off in the air, it goes like this. If it hits the ground, it goes like this. If you've got a foxhole right here and the bomb hits here, you're pretty safe. But if it goes off up above the ground, then it goes like that. It just wipes everything out. They developed what they called a proximity fuse. A proximity fuse is fired out of a 55-gallon howitzer, or 55-millimeter howitzer. And it's set to go off above the ground. There was an area which the Japanese took, and then we retook, and then they retook, and then we retook, and then they retook, and then they brought that proximity fuse in. And they shelled that place and wiped everything out, because it went off above the ground and there was no protection. That's why you get to hate, what are they? They go up and come down.
Mortars?
Mortars, because they go up like this and they come down. They come down straight down. A shell that's fired from a ship, a battleship or something, goes a long ways and then just lands. And it goes up. They know where they're going to land, and they target them. But a mortar goes up, and you never know where it's going to come down. And they can wipe out people. It wipes it out. You can have a foxhole and it will wipe you out.
Yeah.
So you give a good report. You know, I love to come home. And our outfit was a bunch of, we had people from everywhere. I joined what was called the 43rd Division, 169th Infantry. And they had a,
Thank you.
they had a Vermont, Connecticut. It was a New England, 4 New England states that made up, their National Guards made up the 43rd Division. It's called the Wing Victory Division. And that, but we were replaced by people from all over the world, all over the United States. I'll tell you one sad thing about the World War II. In the conscription, the drafting part of it, every town, every city, every village, every place was given a quota that they were supposed to meet. We had a man, 38 years old, come in from a little town in Nebraska. When you're 38, you're slow. Your reactions are slow
You know what's slow
compared
is.
to a 21-year-old
Uh-huh.
or a 19-year-old or 18-year-old. And I think he got killed because he just didn't, he couldn't react.
Mhm.
You know, it was past the age of really active duty.
So they want the young ones, and that's the
So they
thing.
weren't all young ones.
A lot of
you
young
know.
men my age were killed.
We had
lot of them didn't
we had a
marry.
lot of older people in our outfit
Uh-huh.
that had been drafted from, or they were part of the National Guards in those companies.
Uh-huh.
I'm glad I'm home. I had my brother Jim was in 4 years and spent it in Florida playing football. His
Oh, really?
commanding officer wanted a top flight football team, and he kept him there 4 years nearly
Wow.
playing football until Gib finally said, "I'm not playing any more football," and they shipped him out. He ended up in Leyte, which is in the Philippines. But it was after the war, really. It was after Leyte had been secured. But he came up to see me in Luzon. It was wonderful to see him. It's been nearly 4 years,
Show
4.5
them the
years
difference in the
since
stories.
I'd seen him.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, show him those pictures.
What was
Okay,
that?
I got when I was drafted,
Uh-huh.
and then this one
You can
is
see which one is David and what war does to you. This was his brother that did not.
Oh, yeah.
Can you see?
I'm gonna.
Can you see how David looks?
Yeah.
He looks like
He looks
hasn't
really
had a good
scrawny.
meal
Yeah.
in a-
when I was in
Yeah.
Cabanatuan in the Philippines. And
Uh-huh.
he came to see me, wrote to me, and told me he wanted to hear what a gun
Shows
sounded.
you what
when it
war
went off.
does to you.
Yeah.
That's the
And my
sad.
kid brother was in the Air Force, and he was on Guam, but it was after the war. My sister Martha was in the Navy Nurse Corps, and she served in Oakland, California, and in Hawaii, and in the Nurse Corps. But we all came home. Bonita had a cousin that he saw her cousin saw the man that shot him,
Oh, really?
and he was paralyzed the rest of his life. But he saw him.
But that was in the Korean War. That was terrible.
Well,
So don't go to war. Don't vote for war.
Good idea.
but if your country calls you,
You have to go.
but remember that I want you to know you live in a free country. Be proud of it and honor it. And when they salute the flag, you put your hand over your heart, because that distresses me terribly when they don't even put their hand over their heart when they play the Star Spangled Banner or the Pledge of Allegiance.
But when the band goes by on the 4th of July, I tell David, stay here. You can't join up again.
Well, I love this country's flag. You know, I fought for it. And the Stars and Stripes to me are a wonderful, wonderful thing. They represent freedom to me. Red, white, and blue.
One thing I told my kids, and I don't know if Sam remembers this, but last time we had an election, I think one of the most amazing things is that every 4 to 8 years
Get a chance.
we change presidents without any bloodshed or any, I mean, there's a lot of vicious politics and stuff, but
But it happens without war and
Yeah.
without having a big
They're
uprising.
Americans. That's the difference. They're Americans. Have you ever watched 1776, the show?
Yep.
We watch it every year because it's really a good play on how those 13 colonies fought. And then the final analysis, Jefferson wiped out the slavery program because it just wasn't time for it.
Mm-hmm.
And they couldn't settle their differences without cutting out the slavery part. It's, America is a free country.
And Centerville is a good place to live.
That's an awesome place to live.